wide-site TV.
Benj, you're one of the architects of the sector deal. Tell me, 2.5 years on, have you observed any change in the mood music, both in policy-making circles and in the public?
So it's been a heck of a journey, actually. If I throw my mind back to March 2019, when we finally agreed and published the sector deal, that was the culmination of over 2 years of work, both within the sector, within the Industry Council, but also tough and extensive discussions with BEIS and other parts of government to find out what this deal could look like, what's going to be the shape of the deal. I think what we've seen over the last 2.5 years since we concluded that is increasing levels of engagement. We've seen good progress on a number of the commitments on both sides. Of course, this was a deal that meant both parties were making commitments to the other. And I think we have seen good progress. There's still a lot more to do. We're making good progress around radar. We're making good progress around the environmental challenges, and we'll come back to that, I'm sure. We're making good progress on transmission networks and on supply chain. And government is also holding its side of the bargain. We've seen all of the investment that's gone into the supply chain, for example. So, yeah, I think what's changed is the centrality of offshore wind in the government's plans to hit net zero, but also the centrality of offshore wind in the government's story for COP26 and its story internationally about the UK's global leadership in offshore wind. It's a huge opportunity politically, but it's also a huge opportunity economically, and I think the government is really embracing that now.
Yeah, and if I can just sort of take you back to when you did first start negotiating the sector deal, or even thinking about the sector deal, what were your wildest dreams for the sector deal?
So, the thing was, we probably didn't really know. The sector deal process was a very strange one, and we spent the first few months simply trying to understand what a sector deal was, what was government looking for, and Greg Clark, who was Secretary of State at the time in BEIS, was very clear that he wasn't going to be very clear on this. So we were kind of in a situation where it was a bit like, I've described it before as blindfold darts. So we'd kind of come up with something and, does this look like a sector deal? No. So it was very iterative, which, at times was frustrating, but also was very valuable because it helped us refine and test and challenge, so that what we ended up with was actually a very strong set of proposals on both sides. But we didn't really have, it wasn't like we said in January 2017, here's a grand plan, here are the things we want. But I think if you boil it down, what we wanted to be sure of is that we could continue to build out offshore wind, building on the back of the success of the contracts for difference. We wanted to be sure that that wasn't going to be taken off the table anytime soon. Of course, government committed to roll that out to 2030 and has been consulting on taking it further. We think that's absolutely critical. And that they would run those allocation rounds at least every 2 years now. That has slipped because of AR4 being delayed somewhat, but I think in the context of a global pandemic and government having some rather important urgent priorities, you can kind of see the case. But we must get back to that biennial process. Absolutely vital to give the supply chain confidence. So from industry's perspective, the most important thing was maintaining ambition, growing ambition, and maintaining that pathway, that pipeline of projects that would give the supply chain the confidence to invest, and us as developers the chance to drive the cost down continuously, project after project. For government, they've been obviously very clear that what they always wanted was growth in the UK supply chain. We're seeing that big time. We're supporting the Offshore Wind Growth Partnership. So there's a lot going on, I think, that is showing both sides of that deal are both delivering and demanding what we put into it.
Can you think of any particular turning points in that whole process?
In terms of agreeing the deal, I don't think so. It was just relentlessly difficult, actually. It was a labour of love for me and for many in the team and other members of the Industry Council. And it was, as I say, very iterative. So we would try things. There were a couple of dead ends we went down, which I'm not going to dwell on. But behind closed doors, there were some pretty tough conversations, tough on both sides. And I guess that's how you do. That's how you hammer out a deal.
So it seems. So obviously that's now led to significant expansion, but
yes.
That brings with it its own challenges, and I'm thinking particularly here of biodiversity and environmental management.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about that.
So we identified a whole range of challenges to address through the sector deal in order to ensure that, at the time we were saying, let's build 30 gigawatts. And funnily enough, back in January 2017, when we started this conversation as the Industry Council, the idea that you could build 30 gigawatts by 2030 was completely absurd. We said 30 by 30 and 50 by 50, and everyone was laughing, don't be ridiculous. Of course, shortly after we did the sector deal that did agree the 30 by 30, it went up to 40 by 30, and we're on track to deliver that, and hopefully considerably more than 50, maybe even 100 by 2050. So, that was at the heart of it. And we identified a whole range of issues, whether it was the impact of offshore wind on air defence radar, whether it was the issues around a grid that's fit for that volume of offshore wind, whether it is the spatial planning to make sure we have the space for it. Those are all baked into the sector deal. And I think one of the things that's become clear is, while we're making progress on all of those, I think the particularly knotty one is environment, and the whole issue of solving the dual crisis of climate change and the biodiversity crisis. We know both of those need to be fixed. And of course, technology and political will and finance can sort things like air defence radar, things like transmission networks. Fundamentally though, spatial planning, we've got to work together to find solutions, because we know the marine environment's under huge pressure, not least actually from climate change. So we need to make sure we continue to tackle climate change, but do it in a way that also delivers enhanced and improved marine biodiversity, stronger ecosystems at sea, so that we have a planet that's thriving, as well as climate change that's been put back in its box.
And I know in the past you've spoken about making tough choices, and it feels like it's this area you were alluding to. Talk to me about what those choices might look like.
So there are tough choices. The sea, although when you sit on the beach on a summer's day and look out, it looks wonderfully tranquil and peaceful and empty. Of course, it's extremely busy. We have legacy industries like oil and gas. There's a lot of shipping going on, both nationally and internationally. We have aggregates extraction. We have telecoms cables. We have pipelines. We have interconnectors. And of course, we have offshore wind. And we have fishing. So there's a whole range of different human activities in the sea. And I think it's going to be really tough choices that we've got to make about what we prioritise. And of course, from the offshore wind sector, I would say the most important thing is that we responsibly build out offshore wind. But perfectly reasonably, other sectors say, well, actually we're very important too, and they are. So I think in the end, this is going to come down to what does society want out of the oceans? What is the most important thing? We've got a climate crisis, we've got a biodiversity crisis, we need food, we need telecom, we need all of these things. But in the end, I think it's going to be policymakers and ultimately politicians on behalf of society that are going to give us the guidance. And then we can sit down around the table with all those other interested parties and thrash it out. But I think that framing absolutely has to come from, if you like, society via its politicians.
Yes, indeed. Finally, what do we not know enough about?
So there's lots we don't know about. In the context of biodiversity and environment, though, actually we have a huge amount of data, particularly, in fact, from offshore wind development. We do a lot of surveying before we even start building the wind farms. We do years of bird surveys, mammal surveys, surveys of the seabed, see what state it's in, and then we continue to monitor it. So we've got a lot of data. I think the big challenge we now face is to get all of that data together in a way that can give us more knowledge. So we've got the data, we need to turn it into knowledge. And of course, there's always more data that we can collect, and we should keep on gathering data. I very much hope that will enhance our understanding of what is the real state of the ocean and what are we doing about it. And I think that will also inform how we then move forward in terms of dealing with that biodiversity crisis. And as Ørsted, we've committed to all projects being biodiversity net positive that we commission from 2030, and I'm sure others would like to follow behind us on that. And of course, data is going to be a crucial part of that. So getting the data and then making sure we understand it, I think that's where the answers lie.
Thank you for speaking with me.
Thank you, Nova.
Energy. Marine. Energy. Power. Widesight TV.